Good afternoon, or good whatever it is, wherever you are, and welcome to this week's episode of Tilton Talks Crypto, podcast brought to you by SmartFi. I'm Martin Tillier, head of research at SmartFi. The people you can see here on your screen: Aaron Tilton, the head honcho, the co-founder and CEO of SmartFi, and Tovar, who's our community manager at the company too. Between us, we're going to be covering a few interesting subjects today. And we have a guest of honor, if you like, who I'm sure people will be excited to hear from, Natalie Brunell. More on Natalie in a minute. Before we go, there are a couple of things. Firstly, every week we give away $50 of SMTF to the best question asked by our community. Last week that went to Rand Piers. It could be you this week. So, ask things that are on your mind as we carry on. And talking of community questions, that's kind of a theme early on this week because we've had a few. We usually do a section news you can use where we highlight things in the news, and we do a community questions section. But they're kind of combined this week because really the news has been dominated by one subject in the crypto world, which is the whole FTX saga and things like that. And that's prompted a few questions from our community. So we're going to answer those, or Aaron's going to answer those directly. And also give you a sneak peek of a big announcement coming from SmartFi, which is not related to that, but is actually kind of far more important in our view than any of that stuff that's going on. So let's get into that. Tovar, you're in touch with the community. That's your job. You're the community person. What do they want to know from Aaron at the moment? What's the questions that you're seeing?
Yeah, so they are asking, which companies are we exposed to?
Yeah, I think obviously with FTX, it was an earth-shattering, massive disruption in the crypto marketplace because the centralized exchange that was, I think, second largest in the world behind Binance. And they had something like 147 different companies that were part of their umbrella that traded, had exposure to lots of other companies, and it's just had a cascading effect. And we're happy to basically discuss and announce that we had zero impact. We had no assets on FTX at that time that it collapsed. We had done transactions with them before, years before. And, we're fortunate that we were able to manage things here at SmartFi in a way that's a little more secure, certainly a little safer, and we don't have this over-levered exposure. We don't engage in levered trades. And that's really what was going on at FTX, is that they're using their community token to basically extend leverage into the marketplace. So we don't do any of those things. We don't have any exposure to FTX or any other exchange or group where they're tied to FTX. So we're safe. We do things a little differently here. We don't use leverage when it comes to transactions and helping to fund loans and do those things.
Yeah, so that's the next question is, what is our policy regarding leveraging and how do we secure funds?
Yeah, we don't use leverage. That's the policy, right? That it's dangerous. And in fact, when we do our lending for cryptocurrencies, it's the opposite. It's balance sheet accretive to us, where we require anybody who wants to get a loan with SmartFi has to post up more collateral than the dollars that we give out to them. So that if the market has a drop, we can either stop that risk out by selling their collateral, or they meet a margin call where they have to post up more margin that secures the funds. So we don't use leverage. We actually use the exact opposite. We're de-levered. What was the second part of that question? How do we use assets?
Okay. Yeah, how do we secure funds?
Yeah, well, and I guess depending on what they mean by the word secure in terms of counterparty risk, we already talked about that. We don't use leverage. We de-lever, actually. But in terms of securing funds, what do we use for a system on our network? We use the Fireblocks hot wallet. It's an institutional grade wallet. It basically has a network that's tied into lots of other institutions, so we can move funds around and different things really quickly if we need to. But again, the whole aspect of what we do with funds is we de-lever what we're doing in terms of cryptocurrency loans, so we don't have any exposure that way.
Okay.
Safer.
So has SmartFi changed anything?
No. We're still running the same way that we always have. In fact, we'll talk about some of the news that's coming up. We've enhanced what we think is a very interesting integration and partnership with a bank. We can't let out of the bag exactly who that is, but that'll be done December 1st. So we have an announcement to make about our banking partnership, which will allow users on the SmartFi platform and the token itself to be used as a reward for this banking partnership. And we think it's the first of a kind. We're not sure that anybody else is doing anything like this, but the details of that will be coming out in December 1st press release. And then also coming up in December, we have two more major announcements as it relates to new products that are, again, designed more for safety, but to utilize the best of banking and the best of cryptocurrencies, but in a safer environment, it is obviously paramount in today's crypto markets. People are looking for safety. They're not looking for these crazy returns that were technically they were never really real, right? It was just levered positions that were not really functioning the way that they should, and really were not structured for safety. They were structured for speculation first, and that's not what we do. We're the opposite. We go safety first, speculation second.
I think that's pretty reassuring to hear, actually, all of it. First off the top, it's reassuring to hear that there's no direct exposure to FTX, because that's what everybody's concerned about now. But it's also
or any other exchange. We have zero exposure to any exchange.
Yeah, and that's good news in the current environment. But even better news in some ways is the fact that SmartFi is not reacting to all the headlines and the panic and stuff. They're just keeping going, keeping focused on expanding the products and the experiences available for the community and for holders of the token, and moving forward to keep growing. And that's what solid companies do. I mean, my experience primarily is outside of crypto, and that's what solid companies do in bad times. They don't panic. They don't react to public opinion when it doesn't affect them. They continue with their plans to grow, and that, it seems to me, that's where we are. So hopefully we answered the major questions that people are asking right now. You can still reach us on Discord or wherever, and if you have further questions, and we'll address them in future episodes when and where we can, because we want to be open about this. We want to be transparent. We don't have anything to hide, so why wouldn't we be?
Yeah, and if you look at the tokenomics page, and that'll be updated slowly, there's details around there. There's a question there about show proof of reserves. What we do is we have this structure around our loans. You can see that on the tokenomics page. It's going up and down depending on when things settle out. New loans open up, other loans get closed out. But also I want to make mention of what we started last year before any of this craziness in the markets was occurring, and maybe back up. We've already recognized and have gone through multiple cycles like this. This is not new for SmartFi. We've been around for 6 years now. We've seen the market go way up. When we first started, Bitcoin was about $1,500. And we were in a different iterated form at that point, but we were structuring deals with mining companies and primarily mining the Bitcoin network. Bitcoin was about $1,500, went all the way up to 20,000 in December of 2017, and then came off really hard, went down to $3,000 or even a little bit lower in some cases. So we've seen this cycle. And when we had first concepts of SmartFi and what we were going to do and how we were going to build this, we built it with those cycles in mind, that everything's great when crypto continually runs up. Everybody's fine, right? It's when it comes off that everything is bad, right? And we saw that with our clients when all of a sudden they didn't have the money that they needed to expand their mining facilities and engage in the growth and expansion. But we had to deal with a specific client who is a large mining operation. And we learned the structure of safety around the transactions that we did with those guys. And I won't bore you with all the details, but it was effectively the same cycle, and hedging margins and having de-levered positions so that there was safety in the margins. as well as cash. You had to figure out how does dollars and how do USD figure into this environment, because when people are coming out of crypto, they're going into dollars. And what we did is figure out a way so that you could either be in crypto, you could be in dollars, or in the SmartFi token, which is a kind of an amalgamation of both, so that the safety aspect of it still allows you to generate rewards in the form of SmartFi tokens, and engage in crypto, but also hold safe positions in cash. So that's kind of what the announcement is about in December, and how this all works with an FDIC regulated and insured bank. And so we'll give you more details of that coming up. But, I guess suffice it to say, this is not our first rodeo. And we also last year, kind of again, going back, we started diversifying into other lending facilities, one of which was real estate. The other one was equipment loans for small businesses. So when the markets were collapsing for cryptocurrencies, 1/3 of the portfolio that we had absolutely zero impact on it because it was not in crypto, right? And that was the goal for SmartFi all along, was to be able to lend into the actual normal real world, where people still have to get up, they go to work, they do all their stuff. The real estate doesn't disappear, but in trading in crypto, that's really what was going on with all these other institutions. They were building levered positions in trades that could go to zero really quick, and it vaporized value. And SmartFi realized years ago that that was not a sustainable model. It instituted or inculcated volatility. And though the other assets that we deal with, equipment or real estate, their value can kind of go up and down. They're not as highly liquid, but that's a good thing. Having something that can be vaporized or immediately liquid is not good in a diversified portfolio. You want some things that are anchored, right? They don't have crazy returns. They don't have all these other things. They're kind of boring, but they're stable. And you need both. And that's really what SmartFi is about, and what we're doing in diversifying all these things. So we have no crypto exchange exposure, in terms of FTX and all these other guys, and no exchange at this point. And our exposure is in other hard assets and other places where we've built transactions around the safety and stability of USD.
If anything, I'd say actually what's been happening the last couple of weeks validates that approach, validates the safety first approach, the diversification, the combination of fiat and crypto that SmartFi is trying to find this balance for, the deal with the bank, which was already well underway before all this stuff happened. All of that, everything that's happened.
We've been working on that bank deal for 9 months for sure.
Yeah, and way before all this, and everything that's happened is, as I say, just validates that. Anyway, we felt we needed to cover that. The community was asking questions, was interested. We're not, as I say, we want to be transparent. We want to be open. We want to deal with those queries. But most people, I would guess, that tuned in today or have downloaded the podcast are probably here not to hear me and you. As much as we like ourselves, or even Tovar, who's much easier on the ear, right? They came to listen to and see Natalie Brunell. We're delighted. I didn't go as far as to say honored to have Natalie Brunell as our guest on Tilton Talks Crypto today. I'm sure most of you will know Natalie as the host of the really successful Coin Stories podcast that she started and stars in. Maybe because of her appearances on national TV, if you're in the States, where she's a regular discussing all things related to Bitcoin. For example, she's appeared multiple times on Fox News, as well as she is there on it, as well as other things. Overall, most of all, though, she's a passionate Bitcoin educator. Much so, in fact, that a few years ago, she gave up her successful career in broadcast journalism to concentrate on the Coin Stories podcast and on spreading the crypto message wherever and whenever she could. Her story of why she first became interested in the subject is one that many of us can probably relate to. And just generally, her well-informed and clearly articulated views are always thought-provoking and entertaining. So now you know who she is, if you didn't already. Let's welcome her and bring her in. Natalie, thanks for joining us. It's really great to have you on Tilton Talks Crypto. Um, People hear me go on about myself all the time, but I think they're really interested in you in this position. So the most interesting question to me is how did you get into crypto? I mean, you were a successful broadcast journalist, you had a career, and you kind of gave it all up and went headlong into the crypto space. Why was that?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. You're right. I was a mainstream broadcast news journalist for more than a decade. And I didn't find Bitcoin until 2017. And when I did, I was very skeptical. And I wish I could tap myself on the shoulder, go back in time and tell myself to really go down the rabbit hole and start studying it. Because at the time, I really just dismissed it. I thought it was like a stock. I thought it was very risky. And I also just didn't know why it existed and why it was so important in terms of addressing some of the things that I saw being problems within society. And where that came from is both my experience as a journalist. I was reporting on some of the most pressing issues facing our country, from increasing poverty to crime to the cost of living, education, healthcare. But also from my own background. I'm a first generation immigrant, and I'm the product of two parents who came here for the American dream, seeking economic opportunity and economic hope. And I saw them work really hard and really feel left out of the system a lot, because despite how hard they worked, it was never really enough to take care of the family. Every year it got harder and harder. They were working harder for money worth less, and they lost everything in the financial crisis. So long story short, I embarked on my journalism career with this feeling in the back of my mind after my family lost everything in the crash of 0809, that something in the system's not right. If two people who worked hard and were trying to achieve, the middle class dream are having such a tough time doing it, playing by the rules, and why is, in the meantime, wealth disparity is growing more and more, there seems to be something wrong with the system. And I didn't understand until Bitcoin that it was the problem with our money. And so Bitcoin led me on this journey to really learn about money. And I believe Bitcoin solves a lot of those problems.
I think it does too. I came to it at a different time and from a different angle. I first started, I was writing daily for NASDAQ, and I first started writing positively about Bitcoin in 2014. That was early enough to get me actual death threats in the comments. Like, how dare you disparage the dollar type stuff. But it's my background also going further back. It was an interbank foreign exchange, and there I got a pretty, healthy distrust of central banks generally, but really came to understand money and what it was in terms of it has value only in terms of something else. And as there's more of it, it's subject to the laws of supply and demand. And as more of it is created, so each unit of it becomes worth a little bit less. And that's the thing that Bitcoin obviously was designed to counter. And so I think we came to the same place by a different path. But same kind of understanding of it. As I said, you now have a successful podcast and specialize in the space. You've been on Fox News talking about Bitcoin, this, that, and all sorts of things that are great fun. You come into contact with a lot of prominent people in the space. Obviously with what's going on now with the whole FTX situation, talking to them, how do you get the sense they see, or how do you see the future of the crypto lending industry and the DeFi side of things that have kind of sprung off of Bitcoin since?
Yeah, well, I definitely don't believe in DeFi on centralized exchanges that are not regulated and not registered. So I think that space has a lot of questions surrounding it. And at large, it's just very, very different from Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the DeFi. Bitcoin is truly decentralized, and it's this open source protocol that is a digital asset that has no issuer and can be self-custodied. So Bitcoin actually, I think, comes out looking really great. And I think it inspires people to want to study it. And I'm very bullish on the fact that in the wake of this FTX disaster, where so many people lost money, more and more people than ever are pulling their Bitcoin off of exchanges. I think the latest report I saw was that like 115,000 Bitcoin came off of exchanges. And so, I think that people are taking this seriously. The fact that the idea of trust is exactly why Satoshi Nakamoto invented Bitcoin. It was this idea of what you mentioned, that we can't trust a central bank. We can't really trust anyone with this power, monopoly over money. You can't have a small amount of people have all the power and control over a form of money, and the central bank having this monopoly on money. And SBF was essentially a central bank, and he was minting tokens, he was printing money, and then using that as collateral for loans. And what he did was really egregious. And the fact that retail investors who were probably just, regular working class people who are trying to save for their family's future, the fact that they got defrauded is not okay. And someone needs to be held accountable for that.
Yeah, I think they will be too. And I've made this point several times. People, have been jumping up and down saying, "Oh, it's the end of crypto." It's got nothing to do with crypto. This is a case of somebody, who took excessive risk, did terrible risk management, took excessive leverage, and it's coming out now seems to have basically committed the ultimate sin of anybody in finance and commingled funds and done things that are, that aren't okay. That was him doing that. That wasn't Bitcoin doing that or Ether doing that, or it doesn't reflect on crypto at all. It reflects on him. End of story.
The way that I would phrase it is Bitcoin had nothing to do with this. Bitcoin is neutral, and it is this open source protocol that gives property rights to billions of people around the world. And unfortunately, in the crypto space, we do have bad actors. We have maybe some interesting ideas, but that haven't been made technically or economically or ethically sound yet. And so I think that what people need to realize is that within Bitcoin versus crypto, there's this big question, right, for the average person. Well, if Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency, if Bitcoin is a crypto, why is crypto not Bitcoin? And I think it's one of the most difficult things to finally grasp and wrap your head around. And it certainly took me, thousands of hours of study to realize that Bitcoin truly has no issuer, and it is a digital asset, a digital commodity that you can self-custody that is secured by computing power and energy, whereas almost everything else out there has an issuer, and it is backed by essentially fiat, by decree, by someone's confidence and belief. So essentially it's backed by nothing. And so this allows you to enter into an area of risk that you may not be aware of if you're new to the space. And so I really want to hone in on that point that Bitcoin is very different and has a 14-year track record and a very specific consensus model and verification system through proof of work that is highly distributed and is based on energy and based on truth and network effect, whereas every other crypto has yet to prove itself, and many of them will need to register and disclose their risks and be deemed, crypto securities. And I think that we will end up with far fewer than the 20,000 tokens that we see right now.
Yeah, I think you're right. At SmartFi, one of the things, there is a native token at SmartFi, but one of the things that they do differently is that it has something different back, and it's actually backed by loans, and not just loans in the crypto space. There's loans outside in the, for want of a better word, real economy as well. So there's I think that there's a space for something hybrid, but it's got to be carefully done. It's got to be done with a safety first kind of view to it, and that's what we're trying to do. But that aside, one of the things that caught me in there was you saying about people saving their goals, their future, their everything else. One of the things that we try and accent here at SmartFi is that trading, whether it's our token, whether it's Bitcoin, whatever, is not the way most people should be looking at Bitcoin or crypto or anything in that space at all. It should be more, a long-term view, dollar cost averaging to help you get to your goals, not piling all in at once and then trying to pile all out at the same time. A much more structured kind of long-term strategic approach. Would you say that is part of the issue, that it's got this kind of crazy, wild kind of view outside of the space itself? Do you think that's kind of holding it back, or do you think that it's more just the techie side of things in the male dominance of tech that's bled over into Bitcoin and into crypto generally?
I can only speak for myself, and I've always been really focused on saving and thinking about the future and taking care of myself financially, especially given the fact that I'm first-generation immigrant. But I also think I'm a really big risk taker. I'm an entrepreneur with my podcast, and I left a pretty secure, stable job just to see what I can build, because I thought that the mission was greater at hand here. Overall, I would agree with the fact that technology, computer science, engineering, those are very male dominated, and finance as well. But I want to make women feel comfortable because this is a financial revolution that's for everyone. It doesn't matter your background, your age, your gender, what country you come from. That's what I find so inspiring about Bitcoin is it is this neutral asset that anyone can embrace, and it really distributes power over financial freedom back to the people, as opposed to allowing it to pool with the elites, which we can't really trust them with what they're going to do because they keep getting richer and richer and everyone else keeps getting poorer and poorer. So, I am really excited about the future of Bitcoin and how it can actually bridge some of these gaps and bring people together, because one of the things that's unfortunate, and I certainly saw it on the front lines of my media career, is just how polarized and divided everyone's getting. And I certainly feel it a lot here in the US. Everything is kind of pegged blue versus red, but at the core, so many of us are the same. Hope is what drives most of us. Economic hope that the future will be better than the past and that the future will be better for our children. That's universal. And I think that Bitcoin really brings out these principles of hope and collaboration and being able to work in a meritocratic way, because our system right now really rewards the few and doesn't reward them necessarily based on talent and innovation, but rewards them because they're close to a manipulated monetary system. And that's not fair. And I believe that a system like Bitcoin could create a more egalitarian society, not in the sense that it's equal outcome, but at least there's equal opportunity to provide value and to engage in trade and commerce that's not based on a manipulated currency or interest rates. And so I would really like to see our economy realigned, because now we're globalized. I think we're turning more and more in toward ourselves as countries because of what's happened at large with money and energy, and yet with technology and information, we've never been more, decentralized and kind of global. And so, I think it's going to be an interesting decade, and I see Bitcoin as providing a lot of hope. And I think that it will be something that ultimately brings us together and hopefully fixes some of the debt issues that we've gotten ourselves into, because we can't keep living on the tab of future generations. It's not fair to them, and it crushes society, and it creates serfs. It's the road to serfdom, working on harder and harder for money that's worth less, and people are chasing yield. And at the end of the day, I'll close out, this thought train by saying that the reason we're in this whole FTX situation is because people were chasing yield. We had 40% of the dollars printed in the last 2 years, a ton of speculation in the space. The government was printing money that was going to corporations and fueling an equities bubble and a real estate bubble, and also handing it out directly in the form of stimulus. And so, of course, we had this massive bubble of excess, and now it's popping. And we're seeing which companies actually were full of fluff. And in a painful way, that should happen, because again, we need to have a society that's based on economic value and not based on manipulated interest rates and free government money that is actually just debt. It's just credit. It's money we owe ourselves. And Bitcoin really addresses that. And it strikes at the heart of the fiat Ponzi. And so that's why I passionately speak about it, because more people should understand it.
Central banks and governments are having some of the power taken away from them and given back to the people, and they don't like it. And so there's this resistance to the whole idea. But we won then, and the people are going to win this time too, because that's the history of the world. That's what happens. So I'm kind of optimistic, like you. I think there is a way forward, but we're at a strange place now. Anyway.
Oh, I am too. And, the only thing I'll say about that is when I was a journalist, I definitely hit a point, especially in the last couple of years, where when I didn't understand or know about Bitcoin, I looked at the future with a lot of anxiety and a lack of hope, because I felt like there was nothing that was going to pull us together. And I saw us going in a direction of more and more division. And I didn't see anything that could actually solve this wealth concentration and inequality. And when I learned about Bitcoin, it really provided me with a lot of hope, because it was a solution based on technology and the law of physics. And the more you study it, the more you realize how it was a genius invention that stood on the backs of giants who were working in this space for decades. And it didn't just, manifest out of nowhere. It was decades of work and computer programming that led to proof of work and to, solving the Byzantine generals problem. And I really feel empowered by it. And I think that most people won't need to know it at the fundamental, core level, the pipes and the infrastructure. I'm just a curious person. I really wanted to understand it. Most people will just find a lot of utility out of it, and they'll see that this system works better and is more accessible and is more reliable than the one that they were in and doesn't steal from them. So I'm very optimistic about the future.
That's actually a point that you've made in the past, Aaron, too, about people don't have to understand the ins and outs to
I was
see
just going to ask
utility
a
in crypto.
question about the practical application, right? The utility. Right? When we started, we got into crypto. We were involved in lots of things that would be very arcane and very ethereal to other people in relating to mining. And we built these derivatives off of silicon chip fabrication timeframes and the miners regression process and all this other stuff that people are like, I have no idea what that is. But the real utility around the average person, what can they do with it? What's it useful for? I read some things about your family's history and some of the issues that they had in 2008, and just the financial crisis. And we've also got our head of customer service here is putting her kids through college with she dollar cost average Bitcoin, right? Awesome application, perfect application. And we've started this other podcast with the women at our company who have a variety of experience. Some are brand new to crypto. Some of them are, like Michelle, they've got years of crypto experience. What would you say is about the average person? What should they do? Why should they do it? And when?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's one of the reasons why a lot of Bitcoiners in the space, when we introduce Bitcoin to people, we don't just start talking about monetary theory. We ask if we can send someone Bitcoin, because the second that they have it and they have skin in the game, they're inspired to learn about it and also see how easy it is. Because for so many people, they need it just demystified, and they need to download a wallet, be sent some Satoshis. They can see that, you can transact in fractions of Bitcoin, and then you kind of get them going. And so what's really inspiring to me and interesting is I think that we're going to have sort of a clash of two worlds from the West to the developing countries, where in the West, we already have sort of this pattern and idea for most people and this is our privilege, I believe, that we have a concept of saving, store of value. You need to save, you need to put away for the rainy day. But in some of the developing countries that I've either visited or I've read about in terms of covering this space, they live hand to mouth, and they need it as a medium of exchange. They need access to dollars and access to the banking system, which they don't. And so Bitcoin really bridges those two worlds, and I think they're going to come together. I think in the West, we're going to see it more and more as a medium of exchange, and people will use it in transactions, whereas in the developing nations, it's first used as a medium of exchange, and they're going to learn how to save and be able to save for their future, and the two worlds will come together. And I'm actually really inspired by that. And when you mentioned the woman DCAing and saving for college, some of my favorite guests have really talked about those types of scenarios where Bitcoin was used as sort of a life raft in terms of being able to provide financial security for someone. From Afghanistan, I interviewed a CEO who was paying her employees in Bitcoin, and they were able to gain financial freedom. Some of them weren't able to have bank accounts just because they were women, and so they needed to have the permission of a man in that country. And then also being used when the Taliban took over in terms of escaping as refugees. They used Bitcoin to be able to secure their escape paths when all the banks were closed and there was a run on the banks. And in Ukraine, I have a girlfriend who does human rights advocacy there, and was helping the refugees that were fleeing from Ukraine to Poland, and she was facilitating some of that aid in Bitcoin. And so again, it's being used in real time. And I think people do need to use it more, as opposed to just, hodling it and acting like, it's just meant for storage and we're going to keep it on the tortoise level of 10-minute, block transactions. No. We also need to use it. We need that lightning speed, the layer 2 solutions, the layer 3 solutions, the lightning network, and how that will empower us all to send money over IP at lightning speed. And there's nothing like it. There's nothing as secure as Bitcoin for that. So yeah, I'm excited about the future of that on all sides.
It's actually interesting because I think I think it was in 2015, I wrote an article about exactly what you're talking about. You can go back on NASDAQ.com and find it, not to just promote my work there, but I was writing about the same thing, that for me, the exciting thing about Bitcoin was the ability to give financial freedom to the unbanked around the world for whatever reason. It's kind of ironic that, you have a huge number of people who don't have a bank account, but they have access to a mobile phone. They can use, they can transact, and they do transact in Bitcoin. And people here tend to look at it and say, well, I can't buy things on Amazon, so it can't be real. There's all sorts of parts of the world where it's very real. It's the only thing that's actually real, because the paper money isn't. And I think people overlook that.
Well, and of course, and we talk about inflation here, and of course, in other countries, it's far worse. I mean, the Lebanese currency has been debased 95%, has lost its value, and people are transacting and moving to the Bitcoin standard as quickly as possible. And so this is necessary, and it has been necessary for a long time, especially in places where there are oppressive regimes. There are countries where people used to use phone minutes as currency, and now they're moving over to Bitcoin because, again, the entry point, the onboarding is really fast and easy. More people than I think the average person expects has cell phones and access to, a digital wallet where they can carry Bitcoin, hold Bitcoin, and transact in it. And I think that sometimes surprises people. And as we move into a more, connected world with Starlink or whatever the internet of the future is going to be, I think that this is going to really empower everyone to have property rights. They're not going to be able to, purchase the S&P 500 or Apple stock, or, who knows, maybe in the future they will, but they will be able to conduct their commerce in Satoshis. And I think also that's important to just stress again and educate people on. I think that one of the reasons why we see such a loss right now in the crypto space is because of the speculation that was driven by, lower prices that promise or have the potential of a massive return akin to what Bitcoin had in the very, very early days. And so they see Bitcoin as too expensive. And I think we need to keep driving that information, that Bitcoin, one Bitcoin is divided into 100 million Satoshis. And so you can buy as little as $1, $10 worth of Bitcoin. If this is something that you think has a 1% chance of making it in terms of the future of money and the internet, then maybe you put 1% of your portfolio into it, 5%, 20%. Everyone has different risk tolerances and time horizons. But I think people should know that it's really easy to onboard, and a zero position is not a wise one in my personal opinion at this point, because Bitcoin does have a 14-year track record, and we're seeing what's happening with currencies around the world given the geopolitical macroeconomic environment.
Yeah, and I would still say though, we see this all the time when we're talking to brand new people about it. They still have a difficulty figuring out what to do, when to do. When you look at the feedback, when everybody's like, "Oh, go DCA or go do this," they still have no concept, right? The average person doesn't understand this because they're not really taught about what is really owning your own money versus having somebody intermediate it for you.
Yeah.
Right.
So
it's one of the things we learned. I remember the first time we were doing some large transactions on a Ledger Nano. We were sending $20 million worth of Bitcoin on a Ledger Nano, got the little thumbs out, doing the things. I was terrified.
Yeah.
You send that thing, it's gone, right?
Yeah.
And there's still this part that SmartFi works on daily, is that the current blockchain technology still requires perfection of its users.
Well, it does require personal responsibility when you take self-custody, right? And we have sort of outsourced a lot of that personal responsibility in that current system. And my only question for people is, at what cost have we done that? Like, how much have we benefited at large when we do that and introduce so many intermediaries that all take a cut and essentially all feed back into that central bank that decides what the interest rates are and what the price of borrowing is going to be set at. And so I would rather have a system that's based on hard money, where, prices are determined by supply and demand, and there's a fixed supply that can't be inflated or manipulated. And you basically have something that you can actually rely on based on mathematics and a transparent digital ledger. So I think that it's difficult for sure for people to understand it at that like deep nuanced level, because we have such poor financial literacy. And so again, Bitcoin, sometimes I think about in my education, how much am I actually telling people about Bitcoin as opposed to just telling them, shining a light on what they already know is a problem in the system. They just don't know that they know, or they have to unlearn some of the things that school or the media or politicians have talked at them. And then ask yourself the question, well, what is the solution? And then start looking for the solution. And the solution that a lot of us have come to a conclusion is reliable and exists is Bitcoin. And that's why I'm in this space. That's why I continue to try to educate, because if there was something else, I try to always poke holes into the Bitcoin theory, and I have for years. And the result is I always end up thinking, if not Bitcoin, then what? Then what?
Well, and this is one of the reasons why I'm late to this, to the podcast here. The state of Utah has spun up a digital asset blockchain task force, right? So we're on there with the Attorney General, the governor, his staff, the Senate, and the House. And this issue of perfection, right? That blockchain requires perfection because it's immutable. It requires perfection of the users, is something that we're addressing through some other things. I won't go into all the details here, but the state is actually implementing something that would work in concert with other blockchain technology that would allow redress of fraud, theft, FTX-like occurrences, or just errors, right, in general. And so I think as the technology progresses, there's going to be some level of intermediation. And a lot of people, maybe even yourself, won't agree with this, but I would put this forward. Having been in the space for a long time with mining, miners are intermediators. They determine which transactions get recorded and which ones don't, right? Because it's based on a financial incentive that they have. And we helped fund, at one point we were funding about 10% of the mining on the blockchain network on Bitcoin, right? So it was significant. It was all over in China. We had a partner in China. We were doing all these things. But there are some technologies that'll be coming out that I think will be interesting. Not for this discussion, but that's going to evolve. I was listening to your podcast with Michael Saylor. We'll have a discussion for another time, but I love that podcast. You did an awesome job with him.
Thank you.
It was interesting to hear his perspective.
Yeah, no, I think he was making the point that Bitcoin is the one cryptocurrency that is technically, economically, and ethically sound, and one that we can rely on for the future. And he believes that the layers on top will empower the things like DeFi and NFTs that so many people want. And we need to have more clear rules and guidelines and regulations when it comes to the things that are securities. Just like in the traditional finance world, we know that Google or Netflix is a security. We need to know which one of these cryptocurrencies are, and there needs to be a pathway for them to register as such. And then the proper risks will be disclosed, and people can make their own decision, again, based on their risk tolerance. And so I think all of this, will develop. We're still very, very early. And I think I said this on another show that we're writing history right now. And so these days and years feel very long to us, but history will look back and write them in a couple of sentences. And that's just what happens, right? So this is the early stages of Bitcoin adoption. I will agree with you that I think the idea of self-custody is really intimidating for people, especially people like my parents, like don't feel super comfortable with the digital world and interacting with things that are not material. And so they would be intimidated by trying to move, something from one wallet to a cold storage wallet and checking everything. It is intimidating. There will be solutions. But what I like about the Bitcoin standard in the future is there will be more choice and options for people, in the sense that right now you have to trust a custodian, you have to work within the banking system, you have to have an intermediary, you have to work within the Visa and MasterCard and this total pyramid that has been created that's also very, very old and aging. Whereas with Bitcoin, you can make a choice. If you want to be your own bank and take on that responsibility and learn about it, you have that option. If you end up wanting to trust a custodian, you will hopefully be aware of the risks of doing that. And I believe that choice and freedom are essential for society to prosper.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't think you find either of us disagreeing with you there. We all want the same thing.
We do.
We all want the best for our families. We all want our children to be better off than we are. We all want the world to move forward. There's a clip that we use at the beginning of our podcast, which ends with Aaron uttering the words "moving humanity forward." And that's That's what this is, the big picture of this. That's what it's about, isn't it?
Yeah. One of my favorite voices in the space, he's the author of The Price of Tomorrow, which really helped me put Bitcoin into context within the current financial system. He says that, we should focus our time on building the world we want to see as opposed to complaining about the one that we have right now. We should really focus our energy on creating and envisioning a new world that is more fair. And so that's really how I see my work and the work of Bitcoiners in terms of getting the education out there. Because one thing I wrote about in a Bitcoin magazine article when I left my legacy media job and said, this is why I'm focusing on Bitcoin, is this idea that within our polarization and division that I see growing and being exacerbated by things like social media, is I see us sort of not being able to picture something outside of the current system because we have never had it. We've never had a disinflationary asset at the core of our economy, right? We are basically taught that inflation is good and necessary. It's not good if it's too much like it is right now, but in general, it's good. Your house value is going to go up, your stock and 401k portfolio is going to go up. But again, at what cost? Because as Jeff Booth kind of raises in his books and his talks, is this idea that if productivity and technology are supposed to drive prices down, why are they going up? Why is it harder and harder for the average person to afford education, for young people that are coming up, entering their careers, for them to afford a house like their parents or grandparents once could? We're creating a society where the few have a lot and the majority have very little. And of course, that's going to breed frustration and populism and this feeling that I feel left behind. So I have an axe to grind. And so now we polarize because whoever can capitalize on that emotion and that frustration and blame it on someone that's, I can point at someone and say it's their fault, vote for me. I understand why we're in the predicament we're in. But if we take a step back and realize it's the system at large based on credit, based on manipulated interest rates, based on a manipulated system of money that advantages the elites at expense of everyone else. If we can fix that, then I think we can create a more prosperous world of opportunity, and it will be more egalitarian because you will have to provide value in order to get Bitcoin. You don't just get it because you're close to it with low interest rates, and we're not going to have the monetary spigot close to the big corporations and the rich people and the politicians. You're going to have to provide value, and I'm sure the people at the top, the cantillionaires, are not going to like that, but it's going to be a better system overall for everyone.
Yeah, and I don't know if you've kind of delved into any of our ideology around like SmartFi and our white paper, but we always talk about, picking the sheriff, right? Using the analogy that when the pioneers kind of came out west, they landed, kind of did their own brand new thing. They're building these communities and societies, and they have their property, but who did they select and who was there to protect it, right? And picking software like Bitcoin is one way to do it. The Bitcoin protocols are basically the sheriff, right? They decide what you can do, when you can do it, how you would do it. And then you have the other ability to pick government, or you can pick, in fiat currency, or you can pick all the banks, or you have a bunch of different choices. So I loved what you said earlier about choosing, right? And it is the selection of your sheriff, right? And we've seen in some cases they pick, let's say like FTX, right? Becomes a technocrat monarchy that inflates, the value of its own interest in a issued currency that basically crashed and burned, and then took a bunch of people down with it because they commingled their funds and all these other things, we don't need to get into. But it's awesome to hear somebody that has a very kind of, certainly more of a, I would say libertarian bent, but conservative fiscal view. And the goal of SmartFi is really to basically take that same structure, that same understanding, and then embed in that the responsibility for people to make their own choices. So I've loved everything you've been talking about. When I listened to your podcast, been great, fantastic. But the improvements on the technology and what need to be delivered to the people still is not there for that requirement of perfection. There needs to be the ability to allow for errors, issues for people to have some kind of way to redress that grievance, which is not there yet, but it will be soon, right? The technology and smart people will figure that out.
Yeah, the layers.
Go.
Yeah, no, I'll just close
Yeah.
up by saying, the layer 2 and layer 3 solutions on Bitcoin are being worked on right now. And the bear market is really when so much building happens and so much education happens. And I'm really excited to be in the space and to, help people really understand something that for so many probably seems intimidating, nuanced, complicated, because it is, because we're so early. We are still so early. And this has the power to transform the future and how we transact and how we measure value. Because what I love about Bitcoin at the end of the day is it's a system of rules. You can trust the rules. You can't trust rulers. And that those rules based on an incentive structure that's based on competition and it's easily accessible to anyone around the entire world, it really flips our economic system on its head. And I think that the future with Bitcoin looks very bright because of that.
So, in case you didn't realize, the podcast is called Coin Stories, correct, Natalie? Because you won't plug it yourself, so I'll do it for you, right? There it is. Download it, subscribe, do all the things you do. It's really fun to listen to. It's really interesting. Your professionalism as a journalist comes through, Natalie, when you're interviewing people, because you don't let them get away with stuff. If they say, and that's really fun. It's really is a great listen. So I would urge everybody to go and download it. Thanks for being with us today. We really appreciate having you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Well, I don't know about you, but if I take nothing else away from that, I'm going to take away the line about rules and rulers. You can trust rules, but you can't trust rulers. I kind of like that. I might borrow that. Again, thanks to Natalie for being with us. We really, really appreciate having her here. Fascinating to hear what she had to say. I'll reiterate, Coin Stories is a great listen. It's a great watch too. It's a really interesting kind of take on things. So if you haven't yet, look it up. Go there. But similarly, if you've enjoyed this, we all in this world of podcasts love it when you comment, like, subscribe. The reason is it helps us with the algorithms and all that, pushes us further on, gets our message out to more and more people, and that's definitely something we want to do here. So I think with that, we've pretty much said what we need to say and what we want to say today, and we've had a fascinating discussion with Natalie. One other thing that I will mention. Next week here in the US is Thanksgiving, as some of you I'm sure know, but those of you outside the US may not know. So we won't be doing a live stream or recording a podcast next Thursday. We'll be taking the day and spending with our families and eating turkey and doing the things that American people do on Thanksgiving. We'll be back in 2 weeks. In the meantime, as I say, like, subscribe, comment, do all that stuff. On behalf of Aaron, Tovar, and myself, Martin, I want to say thank you for being here, and we will see you all in 2 weeks on Tilton Talks Crypto.